Hello Internet, Seth Skorkowski, and one comment that I've received on several of my videos and stumbled across on various boards out there is how there's a ton of videos out there about how to be a better game master, but there's very few videos on how to be a better player, which, I don't know, I feel like there's still quite a bit of those. I mean, even I've done videos on making great characters and good player habits, but those are also some pretty terrible videos from the early days of my channel, and they should probably be forgotten. And my running RPGs list is far larger than my playing RPGs playlist, which has been neglected for quite a while, so maybe those commenters do have a point. So I started assembling some different tips on how to be a good player, and as that list started getting longer and longer and longer, I noticed that there were two big categories that everything was falling into. The first category was about making a good character, and the other category was over actually getting to play that character with a group and with all the other players. So I went ahead and split those up into those two parts, and because character creation is the first thing that happens, we're going to go ahead and we're going to cover that topic first. So these are some various tips and suggestions just to go over how to make a character that works well for the table and well for the game. And not just characters that are fun to play as a player, but fun and useful for the rest of the table. That way everybody enjoys them. And this advice is going to be system neutral, so it doesn't matter if you're making your character for D&D, Cyberpunk Red, Call of Cthulhu, Traveler, or whatever else, the same general tips are going to apply. However, because there are so many different types of games and specifics for all the different types of campaigns you can have out there, there are going to be case-by-case exceptions. I've also got a two-part series on building better character backstories, how to use your backstory or how to find your character's motivation through their backstory, and those are some pretty good videos. I'm proud of those. So while I'm trying not to repeat too much of what I've already covered in those, at least not go into the same level of detail because certain parts where we are going to be repeating, mostly I'm going to be covering new ground in this video. So if you want to check out backstories and learn all about those, definitely check those videos out. Okay, disclaimers out of the way. The first thing you need to do when making a good character is to consider the game's theme and mood. If the campaign is set in a major city, that woodland ranger character might not be a good match for it. If we're playing a team of police that are working the mean streets, then you should probably make a character who fits that and has the appropriate skills. Is this game going to be a serious affair with, important moral dilemmas and high roleplay, or is this going to be more of a casual beer and pretzels sort of game where we're not really going to be getting, too much into the deeper parts of a character personality? If the character doesn't meet the game's mood, then it can be frustrating, and not just for you, but for the rest of the table it can be frustrating. And the standard advice that I always see when this topic comes up is, well, that's what session zeros are for, and I agree. However, setting up as session zero, that is a tip that I would give to a game master, and this video is about player tips. So if your game master hasn't set up a session zero to formally establish all of this stuff, then go ahead and ask your game master what the game's theme and mood are going to be, and it also might remind your game master to communicate that same information with everybody else. Now, sometimes there is a session zero, and that is great if they do that. However, one mistake that a lot of players make is they come to the session zero already with a solid idea of exactly what they want to play, or even with an already completed character that doesn't really fit whatever the campaign's going to be. So now we're trying to figure out a way to force fit this character into this campaign, and very often that leads to problems later on. So, well, yes, it is perfectly fine to come up with some ideas before the session zero, or once the game master confirms what the theme and the mood are going to be for the game. Don't marry those ideas. Don't commit to anything until you know for a fact that they are going to be suited for the game you're going to be playing in. Next, consider the rest of the group. A lot of campaigns start with the characters not knowing each other, but we all know that these characters are going to meet and do adventures together, so go ahead before the campaign starts and make your character something that complements the rest of the group and has a synergy with the rest of the group. Your strengths should work with their strengths, making them stronger, and their strengths should be able to make you stronger as well. Help try to fill in any of the missing pieces where the party might be missing something. Make the character the type of character whose personality would get along with the rest of the party. Once you're making your character with everybody else, kind of ask them what their personalities are like. That way, all of you have personalities that could get along. Now, that doesn't mean that you have to get along perfectly well with everybody. A little character conflict is fine now and then, but it does need to have some sort of reason why your characters are going to continue working together in the long run versus just in the short term where they might just be stuck together and they don't really get a choice. Why would your characters keep playing together? And you need to have a personality personality that meshes with theirs. I've seen a lot of characters that by themselves were really great characters, but they just didn't fit with the party, and now the group is having to take up their slack or they're frustrated, and it doesn't just hurt their fun, but it hurts that fun for that player because their character isn't all that useful for whatever the campaign is. Maybe the characters are all too similar to one another, or maybe there's some important role that needs filling, such as a healer, or let's say we've got a spaceship crew, but none of the characters in the crew can fly it, or maybe we've got 3 pilots, but no one knows how to work the engines or fire the guns because all we have is pilots. So if there is a role that needs filling, work with the rest of the party to see about filling that role, or maybe figure out a way that that role won't necessarily be as important. Figure out a way that you might be able to work around it. That way nobody has to fill a particular role because you've kind of manipulated your group in a way that doesn't need it. A good group shouldn't just have characters that fill all the necessary roles, but also has backups for those roles. Now, if one character in the group, let's say they can do that one essential thing, then what happens if that character becomes incapacitated or killed, or that player just has to miss a session every now and then? And I've watched players go through all the different character roles like, okay, so we've got one character who can fight, one character can do research, and a third it's got all the social skills taken care of, so I don't need to do any of that stuff because all our bases are covered, so I'm just going to take all the fluff skills. Which inevitably meant that once that other character failed their dice rolls or was absent from a certain scene or a certain session, then no one could take up the slack because nobody had any of the skills that that character had. Or maybe one of the characters could, but now the rest of the group is getting frustrated because, they're now trying to cover the primary role and then a secondary role that was another character's primary role because that player isn't there. But now they're looking at that one character who just doesn't seem to be filling any of the roles while other people are trying to pull double duty, and that kind of starts getting a bit frustrating because that character is providing nothing for the rest of the group. So find whatever your party role is that your character can fill and excel at it, while also having all the skills to help take up the slack in any of the other roles in case something happens. In a large group, you've got 7 or 8 players, the characters don't need to broaden out their skill base a whole lot because there are so many other characters that can, take up the slack and be able to fill the different roles as well as being backup for other roles. But the smaller and smaller a group becomes, once you're down to 3 or 4 players, that safety net of assuming that someone else is going to be able to fill that gap for you is gone. So each character becomes more essential in not only filling all the necessary roles, but as serving as support and backup for all the other characters. Now this brings up skills and abilities. Balance your specialization. I've talked in other videos about the dangers of a character who is too over-specialized in one specific thing, but then they're useless in everything else, a one-trick pony. And then there's the other side of the spectrum where the character has no specialty at all. They're partially skilled in everything, but they can't do anything well at all. One of the things that I had to adopt in our Pulp Cthulhu game is, while we might have characters who are academics or lawyers or, something like that, just not your standard ass-kicking hero, because I run my games to where there's almost always going to be a combat, we ended up with a lot of combats where one character would say, I can't do anything here, guys, so I'm just going to hide out in the back and watch and fail whatever roles I do attempt. And then another player would say, well, that's just great, so I guess I'll do all the fighting and probably die because none of y'all dumbasses can possibly help me here. Again. Which was fun for nobody, so I instituted a house rule that every character had to have at least one combat skill at 50% or higher. Now, I don't care if that combat skill was going to be rifles or handgun or hand-to-hand or even the ability to dodge. I knew that combat was going to be inevitable, and I had seen so many characters who didn't put any skills in fighting, or they'd spread their skills out to the point that they sucked at equally in everything no matter what their occupation was. I wanted to make sure that each of them had at least one form of combat specialization, and that ended up working wonders for our campaign. Now, that is something that I did as a game master, and that I would make as a good tip that other game masters should do, of telling your players what skills or abilities that they're going to absolutely need for their campaign. However, once again, this is about being a good player, so it does no good to talk about game master tips. So players, ask your game master not just what things that your character needs, but also what they recommend. As a GM, I try to tell my group all the essentials, what it is they need to have, but I also have a pretty good idea of the different things that aren't required, but would be pretty useful or really cool if somebody had it. Now, I'm not going to force them to take those things because they aren't actually essential for anybody, but I am known to give a few hints as far as what would be cool, and whether they take that hint or not is a completely different matter. You know, it might be pretty cool if one of your characters could fly a plane. But we don't have to, right? No, it's not essential that anybody has to. And a few games later, man, it'd have been really cool if one of us knew how to fly a plane. Yeah, that would be pretty cool, but there's no way we could have possibly known that before the campaign started. So players, listen to those hints that your game master might be giving you as, different powers or abilities that might be a little bit extra useful here, and even if they aren't hinting, there is nothing wrong with asking them what they suggest. So my linguists know 3 additional languages. Which ones do you think would be the most useful? Well, I don't want to give away any spoilers or anything, but German might be a pretty useful one to have. Well, German it is. Because now your character is more likely to have skills that are going to be useful for your campaign, but they're also less likely to be picking a bunch of skills at random because they don't know what to get, but they're going to end up being not useful. So it's always a good idea to ask your GM what they suggest. Next, if you're going to be picking a character ability or power that has special rules, you're committing to learn what those rules are. Play long enough and you're going to see that player who wants to play that spellcaster or that netrunner, or use that fully automatic shotgun with overlapping cones of fire, or something just really cool that has its own special rules, but then that player doesn't bother to learn what those rules are. So every time they want to use that ability or use that item, or having to dig through the rule book, or the game master is having to explain it yet again to the player. It is terribly frustrating for everyone around the table, and also pulls the wind out of your sails when every time you want to bust out that awesome thing, it then grinds the game to a halt as everybody has to stop and look it up. So when you choose that special ability, you are committing to learn the rules for it. Now, it might take a session or 3 sessions before you have that down, and that's totally normal that it takes a little bit to learn it all, but it becomes painfully obvious when you see that player who is making no attempt at all to learn the special rules for their specific character that they chose to play. This is homework, so before the next session, review the rules, or make some cheat sheets, or whatever it is you need to do to help yourself remember whatever your special rules are before you play. So, if you're wanting to play a spellcaster or psionicist or something that's got some special rules, it is your job to not drag the game down. And if you can't learn those special rules because they're a bit too complicated for you, then you might want to play something else that's a little bit less complicated. And on a similar vein, if you're going to be choosing powers or abilities that have special rules, check with your game master first. You might all be new to this game that you're playing, and the GM might want to hold back on some of the special powers or options simply because they're already feeling overwhelmed with all the basic rules that they're trying to get down for the game. Or one thing that I recently encountered where we're playing a game where the characters each had to choose 1 or 2 disadvantages, and that was really cool. I liked the disadvantages that they had, but then there were several of those disadvantages that were on that list that the players were choosing where I, as the game master, had to remember it and all the rules for them. Like there was nothing at all that the player did. They were just assigning me as the game master the job of keeping track of this and remembering when to activate it, which, yeah, that was great for the players because they didn't have to do anything on their end except for hope I forgot, and then they don't have to deal with their disadvantage, which I recognized that when I saw that, and I went ahead and put a kibosh on that because I was busy learning the game myself and trying to wrangle 4 players that were trying to learn the game without them giving me additional homework and responsibilities that I had to do because I already had enough on my plate of what I was handling. So I went ahead and said, go ahead, choose a different disadvantage that you are the one that keeps track of and you're the one responsible for. So not only should you think that, hey, is this special ability or is this special thing that I want to give my character going to be a burden for me to learn and track, but also, is this going to be a burden for the game master to learn and track? And verify with your game master if that's the case. You want your game master to enjoy your character and not feel that they're burdened by them. Next, have a plan for what you want your character to become. Character creation is about making the character as far as, what they are and what they were before you started playing the game. And then once the game game begins, that's all going to be unknown factors out there. However, we should still have some goals of what we want this character to be. Some games have different skill trees with multiple steps. Like if you want to become a badass fighter that fights with 2 swords, then you're going to have to get these 3 abilities in order for yourself to do that. So when you're making your character, at that point, you're going to need to choose that you get this ability and you get this ability. And then once you start playing and gaining experience points through the adventures, that's when you can pick up this 3rd ability. And then once you have a few more adventures under your belt, you can then, get that final ability and do that thing that you've always wanted to be able to do. But doing that requires foresight. And very often, the path to achieve that goal needs to begin during character creation. I've watched a lot of players who then get frustrated that they didn't have any clear plan of what they wanted the character to be, and now they have kind of a random assortment of different character abilities, and now they're getting jealous of another player who has, all these really cool combo abilities that all complement and build off each other into something extraordinary because that other player had foresight while they didn't. Now, and this is very important, while I say you need to make a plan for wherever your character is going and what you want them to become, once the game begins, be open to changing that plan. No matter what the game master planned for the campaign in advance, once it makes contact with the group of players and everybody's dice and we get to see it in action, that's when things are going to change. And characters who refuse to adapt or evolve with these changes can easily fall from being those early on favorite characters to being long-term disappointing characters, especially when your characters might have some joke or some gimmick behind their inspiration. If they don't grow, then that joke or that gimmick gets old very, very fast. So while you originally might have imagined your character's advancement and personality growth going one way, it might need to start going a different way once you start playing that character. So now let's talk about personality. A good character isn't just a collection of stats and abilities. They have a personality. So when you're determining what that personality is, a simple formula, a classic writing trick, is to start with an adjective to describe their personality. Are they curious, nervous, trusting, greedy, charming, a scoundrel? I feel that this is somewhere where simpler is better, so write this word somewhere in your character sheet very visible, like somewhere up at the top or somewhere that's a regular reminder that this is your character's core personality. And then during play, you should try to emulate that adjective and how that character responds to things. This not only gives your character a distinct personality that's different from your own, but it's also consistent. And consistency is important. The different characters that we watch in our favorite movies or favorite shows, we can always anticipate how they're going to react to certain things because they're consistent in their personality. While their personality, they can have different facets to it, this one descriptor is the foundation to all of it. However, and like with your plan for your character's path, this is something that can evolve or change once you start playing this character, and that is perfectly fine if that happens. If your character's personality descriptor, does evolve or change, then go ahead and replace it at the top of your sheet with something else, whatever the new one is. Let the game master know that, this is, what we're going to be changing it to, and or to remain consistent to whatever it evolves to. Now, on a personal note here, one thing that I recommend is that this core descriptor also be something that works well with the rest of the group, both in and out of character. I plan on going more into this when I do my video on good player tips for once the game has already begun, but if I never ever see a character whose entire personality could be summed up as unlikable asshole or antisocial loner again, I would be perfectly happy with that. They might be fun characters to watch in a show or even fun characters to play, but they are a whole lot less fun to play with. And if you're wanting a character that the rest of the people around the table enjoy playing with, I don't recommend playing those character personalities. Next, once we've got a personality descriptor, give them a gimmick. Now this can be something that's entirely in-game, like they dress in bright foppish colors or they have a huge mustache. But these can also be gimmicks that you can bring to the table, such as mannerisms, like you're always playing with your mustache as you're role-playing this character, you're nervously twisting your hands, or different vocal mannerisms like a lisp or an accent or a specific voice that you use for this character. This could be a favorite item like a tool or a memento. It could be useful like a weapon or a vehicle that they're always cleaning and talking about like it's a person, or it could just be, some little memento knick-knack that they're always playing with or always touching. Gimmicks are meant to be fun little quirks and a little memorable aspect, and like with a personality descriptor, it should be put at the top of your character sheet, somewhere to help help you remind yourself to bring it up and use it when you're playing this character. Never do it to the point that it detracts from the game, but enough that every other player around the table knows what your character gimmick is. Not because you told them what the character gimmick is, because they regularly see you employing or referencing it. Giving yourself a gimmick and then never using it means it might as well not exist. Finally, as I mentioned earlier, I've done 2 different videos on making character backstory, so I don't feel the need to repeat all that same information here because those are perfectly good videos. But one point that does bear repeating is to give your character a clear motivation, something they want, something they desire. This is incredibly valuable, but just as important, share what that motivation is. This is something that should definitely be shared with your game master in order for them to incorporate and use that, but I also recommend making it something that the other players around the table know as well. This motivation is what inspires your character to take the quest or go into that scary haunted house that no sane person would ever dare enter. Money is always a really good one to use, but it's also really vague, so I don't really like it that much. I prefer your motivation to be about what the money is intending to buy. What is it you want to do with the money? And that's the deeper motivation that your character has. And I recommend that the motivation isn't something that's easily attainable, like I just want a cup of tea, but something deeper, something that's going to last as long as your character's career is going to last. And if your character does achieve their goal, whatever it is, then you should come up with getting a new motivation for your character. Essentially, the motivation is what separates your character from being an NPC into being a player character, someone who's willing to risk their life and go on all the dangerous adventures. This is the reason that you do all that stuff. And while the game master could certainly provide different hooks and reasons that your character should take that job or take that quest, it's your job as a player to determine what actually motivates your character enough to accept that quest. Okay, well that's pretty much it for this video. Hopefully some players out there are going to find this helpful for making characters that not only do they enjoy playing, but the rest of the table enjoys playing with. And as I said, there are always going to be exceptions. I can personally name a few great characters that were exceptions and skipped 1 or 2 of these, but those characters are the outliers. And now that the character creation side is done, hopefully soon I'll get to the next part of my how to be a good player tips for addressing all the stuff you do once you're actually playing this character with the rest of the group, which also means that I'm pretty open to suggestions down in the comments below of any tips you got for that. Hey, thanks for watching. If you enjoyed the video, please give it a thumbs up. If you want to see some more of our stuff, such as game reviews, RPG philosophy, or even more of this series about being a good player that Seth says he's going to try to get to quickly, but chances are he's probably not going to between you and me. Anyway, just hit that subscribe button. Till next time, amigos, y'all have a great day. I understand why you gotta tell everybody that there is an exception to everything that you tell them. Because yeah, there is an exception to everything you tell them. However, just mentioning that is only gonna make that one player, that guy, suddenly take that as some sort of challenge accepted, and now they're gonna try to make a character that is an exception to everything that you just told them. Which means all the people that guy plays with is about to hate your ass because that guy's about to make a ton of awful characters.